Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for attending the We're Not Finished Flood Maps and Impact of Ongoing Collection of High Resolution LiDAR and User Understanding. We've got Hope Morgan today with us. We're all know Hope. She's a GIS superstar. She is with AECOM as a project manager. She has almost 25 years of experience, hailing from UNCG. She is also a PLS, along with a GISP and a CFM. What other interest? Oh, a past president and also longtime board member of NCAUG. Along with Hope, we have Marcia Tobin, who is an urban planner with not NCOG, but AECOM. Okay. She works with communities to reduce risk from hazards, primarily flooding. She has over 20 years of experience on the West and East Coast with coastal communities. Just a few housekeeping before we get started. We have sessions today from 1 to 5:15, so be sure to stay on as long as you can. And at the close of today, we'll give away door prizes, so you have to be present to win. And then for tonight's social type event is special interest groups from 6:30 to 7:30, and they are Women in GIS, GIS Leadership, GIS Early Career, Enterprise, and Natural Resources, Environmental. Also, we have merchandise on the, I think it's the swag button, and all the merchandise or swag goes towards our scholarship fund. Again, all the sessions are recorded and will be available on YouTube. Once we get those on there, it will take a little while. So just hold on to your socks and get ready to be blown away by Hope Morgan.
Well, Marcia's going to start.
Cool. I'm going to start, and then you'll get Hope.
Well, Marcia Tobin.
It's all good. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here. And Zach, I'm excited that you're excited about this, because I think often, like if you say high density LiDAR, a lot of people will go, wah, but that's what we're going to be talking about. And Hope and I, basically the motivation, it came from Hope, but she was curious about who's using the data. We both were. How is it being used? How extensively, how easy or difficult it is, and in what kinds of examples. So we're going to go through that today. Jackie gave a great intro, and just to let you know, I'm an urban planner, so I work a lot on flooding, basically with communities at all different levels, from state governments, federal, to all the way to regional districts. So we had a great chance to talk to a lot of different people. On this page, you'll see this. So went from everything, organizations, USGS and FEMA, as well as state level individuals, people from regional planning districts, from cities, and definitely couldn't have done it or come up with this information without them. So thanks to all of those people, the time they took. And what they did was share how they're using LiDAR right now, what they're using it for, kind of examples, what the methods and processes are. So we got into technical details, and then also what partnerships are looking like and what that results in. So we'll be sharing that now. I'm going to pass it to Hope, and then I'll be back later to talk about how we're incorporating this into resilience. All right, go ahead, Hope.
Thanks so much. So I'm so excited to be here. I love talking to you guys. You guys know that I am just a LiDAR nut job. So talking about how it's being used and where people are using this information in different tasks and responsibilities, that's really big for me. So these are some of the things we're going to cover. We're going to cover the high resolution data and how it's a gift that keeps on giving, how LiDAR does have a place for everyone, and you don't have to be an expert to actually use the data, risk reduction and resilience. Marcia's going to cover how we're actually using it for risk and resiliency and partnerships, and then we're going to give you a couple of warnings on where to go with this data if you are going to use it. So let's talk about the current to the future, right? Where are we with high resolution LiDAR data? Well, you will be excited to know that USGS, as of 2023, is looking to finish the 3-depth first go round for LiDAR for the nation, which means that all of the LiDAR will be available across the nation in some form or another. Some of them are different quality levels. Some of them are 3, 2, and 1. There are areas that have much more dense data. North Carolina has a lot of areas that have very dense data. Alaska actually has ISTAR, which is a little different, but because it is so remote, there are a lot of areas that are covered by ISTAR data collection. So where are we going next with that? Well, when they get done with the initial load of LiDAR and getting those base maps put in, what we're moving to is really bathymetry and moving to hydro. They're looking to use the LiDAR data to define the stream networks across the nation. And that is something that they do already with NHD. However, they are just maintaining information that other groups are gathering, and they're trying to make it a more consistent data set. You can get lots of information about this from USGS, and I would definitely suggest going and seeing some of their presentations that they've provided. But in their interviews, that's really what they talked about, their goal of going to. And then high resolution data being used by multiple partners. So this data is being used across the board. And one of the things that we're really discovering is the different capabilities that you can do with this data. So everything from extraction to vegetation, using it for floodplain mapping, building out terrains for utilities, transportation infrastructure. A lot of these are needed, especially for the National Risk Index. They're really looking at using this LiDAR data as we move forward. And Marcia is actually going to talk to you more about that when we cover risk and resiliency. So what do you need to know about LiDAR? You actually need to know that I want this little bar to go away on my computer so I can see my whole slide. That high density LiDAR is anywhere from 30 to 100 points plus per square meter. They're able to do high density LiDAR now in many different ways with fast, large area collections, which has not really been available prevalently in the past. So everything from photon collections to Geiger, they're really using those technologies to use this advanced density to get us more detail and more information. And then bathymetry is really becoming something that lots of people are interested in. And of course, based on water, where you are, how turbid the water is, these are different technologies in bathymetry to collect different data sets, but these are things that are really coming to the forefront of the next steps of this remote sensing data. Software accessibility is something that in the past it was really difficult to use LiDAR data because a lot of the softwares didn't have the capabilities or you had to have special technologies for this. So now the software accessibility is out there. You're able to create terrains, improve data, the formats are more consistent, and the data is really driving modeling advances across the board. So we have open system that will actually allow you to use LiDAR data where that wasn't really available in the past, and these technologies are just more easily at our fingertips. There's also system advancements. So LiDAR is a beast. It always has been. It's a really large data set. The minute that they figure out how to deal with it, all of a sudden it's 12 times bigger than it was before. So they're really looking at providing this information in an architecture with cloud computing and really cost-effective storage that is allowing people to do more of these capabilities than were done before. And last but not least, and actually probably most important, is because it's a little easier to use, because it's a little easier to get, because we have the tools, a lot more people are using it, and we have more happy people that actually have this data. And I put in here happy customers, and customers is everybody's customers. So not only mine as a company representative, but if you work for the government and the public is your client and your customer, you know, we've got more people that we can explain more information to. So there are federal collections and partnerships that are being done, and it was really interesting to talk to USGS, who basically said we couldn't have done this without partnerships, and we'll talk about that more at the end. But Atal Hanan was from Harris County Flood Control District, and he basically mentioned the fact that if the LiDAR baseline is not good, then it doesn't matter how good your models are. This is the whole garbage in, garbage out premise. And LiDAR has gotten so good now, and we have gotten to the point that it's so readily available that those models are really much better. So really driving what this LiDAR data can provide you and knowing what LiDAR data is out there and what level it is really, really exciting. They're also creating capability. So it amazes me when we create something new, when we get new LiDAR data sets, all of a sudden there's 12,000 projects that can be done that you couldn't do before. So now we can extract buildings, we can build contours, we can get the elevations off the roads, we can get the elevations off bridges, we can do comparisons of the floodplain. All of a sudden there's all this low-hanging fruit that allows you to really see what information is available. And one thing I do want to mention here is There's a really great website, thecoastnoaa.gov. This is the inventory for the nation. And they've done a really great job at showing what data is available where in different locations and giving you information that's available for that and really showing you how to download that and where to pull that data from. And then C-Sketch is another where you can see all the different types of projects that are available. So these are the end user derivatives where you can pull all this information. All right, so I don't know if some of you guys will know what CMMS is. This is the way that FEMA measures the number of streams that they have done for the floodplain mapping program. And InView is the technology that they use to actually show the number of streams that have been collected. And you don't need to remember or read anything on this table, but the goal of this table is to show you how tied in it is to LiDAR. So as you look at the different maturity levels, those tier 1 data sets and those tier 2 data sets are data sets that are based off of the LiDAR data sets. So they are really looking at pulling that information. And then tiers 3, 4, and 5 are the maturity levels that show you if they've met the specs for the LiDAR data sets. So you can really see the number of stream miles nationally that have been done off of the LiDAR data sets and see what the impact to the floodplain mapping program is for the nation. And they are all tracked by quality level. So I actually put QL level in here, but the L is level, so I repeated myself. But the quality levels are based off of a study that was done 2014, somewhere around there, that actually speaks to what the quality should be to do different products. And once it was actually done before that, once they did that study, they could see what, do we need more density for floodplain? Do we need more density for agriculture? What levels of data do we need? And you can find that by state on USGS's website. So this is a little map that I put together, and I did, originally I queried some of the data out and took out the quality level 3 data and took out some of the data done before 2008, but there were a lot of people who were saying, well, we still have data there. So in the dark blue, these are the floodplain mapping panels that are available by county. And in the green, you can see all of the places where we have LiDAR data. So there's 2 things that we're learning from this map. Number 1, we're learning where we have floodplain maps that we don't have data. And then we're learning where we have data where we don't have floodplain maps. And that's really important because this is low-hanging fruit again. This is the place where we can go and we can really see that we could produce these flood maps pretty quickly with the terrain data set that we have. And although there's lots of engineering behind that, this base set of information is really driving where we're getting that data. So a couple things I want to tell you about this. The NFHL panels are from the hazards.fema.gov. So this is just a web service that you can go grab and look at to see where floodplain mapping has been done in the nation. And then I used the interagency elevation inventory from May 2021 to show what years and what data were provided. So what's not showing in here is any work that has been budgeted by USGS to be done this year or next year. So where are we using this information? We're actually using this information focusing on the end users, right? That's our most important. So let's talk about floodplain mapping. That's where we kind of started in my world. I came from the floodplain mapping world where I'm really looking at how LiDAR feeds into the capabilities of producing these maps at a larger level. So you can see it, all these different circles that are pointing out from floodplain mapping, these are all of the places where LiDAR is used. We're using it in discovery and planning to determine where we're going to do streams and where we're going to scope. We're using it in data development, of course, really looking at that survey data to tie down the LiDAR data sets and make sure that we have all of that information accurate, comparing that against the base maps that are out there. We're using it in the hydro and hydraulic modeling to use as a base data set for modeling to determine where the water is going to go. All of that data gets fed into the final DFIRM products and the FIS report. And then, of course, the process, as we go to community meetings, we're having to explain what this LiDAR data is, how it's being used, and what it means. There's a great story behind this. One of our interviewers was Alice Wilson, and she basically said they were using they did a giant appeal. So they submitted a appeal based on the LiDAR data and the building footprints that were done to say all of these buildings were actually outside of the floodplain. What was great about this is, even though it was a little more work up front, using that LiDAR data, they could do one overarching comprehensive appeal to let people know that this was getting updated and fixed, and they could fix it before the maps went final. So it all got implemented into the final firms that were produced for their area. So that was a really great use of that data. I think it startled us when that happened, but it was a good thing that it happened. So the other perspective I come from in this world is emergency management, and really looking at emergency management for that floodplain mapping data. So we've been able to use all those streams, all of those flood boundaries that we've used to actually do planning and determination on these data sets. So we're looking at storm surge, floodplain mapping. We're using it in response and recovery for what cutoff locations there are, search and rescue and transportation. We're using it in recovery for beach renourishment and coastal erosion. And Jason Ray actually gave us a great point that the LiDAR leads to other implementations to conserve beach renourishment, doing sea level rise. These are all things that this LiDAR data leads to. And we also have a big piece for mitigation. And again, I'm going to let Marcia speak to that a little bit more, but really using that for wastewater impacts and elevation buyouts is a great place for that LiDAR data set. So let me give you a couple of examples. We had Chris Mason from Collier County, and he gave a great story about how they were using this for CRS. So, they get the community credits, and people would come in and ask for explanations. And because he had that LiDAR data, he was able to basically show them a map and let them know what was coming and where it was at. And it's really the work that we do all the time. And that's from Ben, and he's kind of letting us know that LiDAR is now used across the board for just about everything that they do. And again, with Alice, who talked about LiDAR being used in the floodplain mapping world, and she's using it from everywhere from development to understanding what buildings and structures they have and how those are going to be impacted by events. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Marcia and let her tell you a little bit about risk.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Hope. So this is kind of a typical diagram that we use in thinking about climate adaptation and resilience. In this particular case, it's focusing on sea level rise, but you could look at any number of different issues. You could look at them individually or collectively, but it's kind of a step-by-step process that we follow. So the key message here is really that each of these steps relies on defensible data. And we start, understanding climate change conditions, what's changing, how is that impacting hazards and their severity. So as one example, if we're looking, say, at a 1% probability storm, we're going to expand those scenarios, include storms that are of greater magnitude and happening more frequently, possibly with greater amounts of rainfall and also greater storm surge. So we'll play around with kind of those boundary conditions in terms of, trying to get a wider spectrum. And then step 2, we're using this LiDAR data, high density data, really to, if we're looking specifically at buildings or assets or different features in the landscape that are of importance, really to understand elevation data. So the better that data is, the more precise we can be in terms of understanding how much freeboard we may want to be building in, how much more other safety factors. And then as adaptation solutions are developed and mitigation solutions, flood walls, for example, or barriers, looking at that really wanting to have robust elevation data to understand, is that sufficient? Do we want to plan in a little more of elevation in there? And then as time is going on and we're adapting, you see this in step 7, we're following really an adaptive management approach. So going back, checking data, updating that constantly, or, on a regular basis in order to really understand what's effective, what may need to be improved. Okay, we can go to the next slide. This example is, so another frame in which to look at this is through community lifelines. So this is something that, a lifeline enables continuous operation of critical business, and government functions. It's something that's essential to human health and safety, as well as economic security. So all of those being very interlinked. But each of these individual kind of safety, looking at food and water, we can examine all of those. LiDAR is going to provide us critical information on exposure to hazards, and especially zeroing in on those assets that are critical for life support: hospitals, shelters, schools, areas where there's gathering places, as well as connections. What are the roads, the transportation links, and how are those being potentially impacted? In the next slide. So looking at the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Community Program, grant program that started last year, that FEMA started in mitigation. And this is really another place where LiDARs are very important. In the grant applications that were submitted in 2020 in January, the top project types were elevations. So projects to look at elevations and to examine those. The next were flood control, acquisitions, and relocation. For all of those, enhanced, more robust LiDAR is really only going to help better those applications, get more funding, and then really help on implementation, so to understand effectiveness. So next slide. So in this, just again, last year in 2020, because of COVID, all 50 states, territories, federally recognized tribes, and DC were all eligible to apply. That's going to continue. So this becomes something that the entire nation can benefit from, this high density data. And next slide. And then, as Hope was saying, we talked to, a number of all the people we talked to. Partnerships was underscored again and again. And Sue Buto really kind of summarizes well. And we're looking at, as we're mapping for floodplain mapping, 80% of the nation has been accomplished. They couldn't have done that without partners working together. So that compounded the amount of analysis that any individual entity could do. And then also really facilitated developing methods that are consistent and utilized consistently in standards across that, across the board. And then finally, the next slide. So again, underscoring these attributes: communication and sharing of data. A tool from Harris County Flood Control District, and then Ben from Hampton Roads, both said, they were working with partners within other departments within their organization, but also municipalities and communities to exchange data within a region. So really important to get that data exchange. LiDAR and exchanging that data, having access to that collectively enabled all of this exchange and information. And I think, okay, so then finally, next one, a set of links, and we'll put those in the chat as well, but partnerships has really enabled all of these training opportunities. So these are cooperative agreements and ventures. They produce training programs. This, as you know, the more people that have more access to this information and training, the more it's going to be used. So again, a great benefit of those partnerships that we were hearing from all of our participants. Okay, so it's back to Hope, and we got some good stories, I think, Hope. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's cover the system first, right? So there are lots of parts and pieces, and we've talked about LiDAR, and you guys have specifically in North Carolina heard me talk about the level of data and the size of data. So there's some things that we really want to discuss here. One is storage, two is processing, and then higher resolution. So having those clouds advancements, you want to make sure that as you're using this data, you understand the size of the data that you're getting, and you're appropriately planning for storage. Where you're going to put it, how much space it's going to take, and not only just the space that you need to hold the data, but the space that you need to process it. So you're going to have to make sure that if you're using cloud advancements, or if you're just using your desktop, you have not only enough space to contain that data, but to process all of the different parts and pieces. Processing, as the data gets higher and higher in resolution, we actually are looking at more time, but more capability. So you can do more things with it. You can use GIS, you can use QGIS, you can use Esri. All of these things really have extensive capabilities now, and Pro has done a great job with implementing capabilities for LAS files to do analysis and to get this information run, but you got to make sure you understand the level of processing and the time that it's going to take to run. So anytime you're working with LiDAR data, get in there, make sure you use it, but you need to make sure as you're planning, you're looking at the system. Then there's a couple of things that are changing. There is a new datum. It's going to be called 2022, but it's probably not coming out till 2025. North Carolina Geographic Information Coordinating Council, the GICC, actually has a committee that Gary Thompson leads on this topic. But I want to make sure that people understand that that datum is changing. However, we have dealt with this in the past. So we understand in using different data and different projections how to make those things work together, and the tools actually have that capability, but it needs to be a seed planted in your head, because you need to know that this change is coming and know that to look for it as you're manipulating this data. The second one is there will be new state plan projections. Again, that working group in the GICC is covering this topic as well. North Carolina has already submitted. In fact, I think that beginning of this year in April, every state had to submit their new state plan suggestions, and then they're working with NGA to make sure that that information is implemented. So there are some changes that are going on at each state. You basically choose kind of how your projection looks. We're going from a two-line projection where we have a line at the north and the south of North Carolina to one in the center. It balances out our state a little better. So that is just, again, those numbers are going to look different. Not really that big of a problem as long as you know to look for it, because if something does look weird in your data, that could be the reason why. And then the last one is they are retiring the U.S. survey flood. That is actually happening in 2021. So as of December, it won't be used federally, nationally anymore. However, the U.S. survey flood is still part of North Carolina legislation and many states' legislation. So there are maps out there that actually show you what states have U.S. state plain feet in their legislation. That's in the works right now to get that resolved. But you're still going to be able to use U.S. state plain feet. It is just not something that's going to be upkept and maintained in the federal systems moving forward. So there'll be tools for you to actually use to manipulate that. But again, you need to know that that's coming. And the last big thing with this is metadata, metadata, metadata. I know we talk about it all the time, and we've been preaching it for a long time now, but this metadata on these data sets is going to save you when these projections change, because that's going to help you figure out what translation you actually need to use to get these data moved forward. So just keep an eye on this, because it's coming. All right, let's play with a little bit of politics for a minute. So we all know that we have to go to our boss and explain what all those little dots do and what they mean. So we really need to look at those partnerships that we've worked on to validate the need for this data. And I think North Carolina's done a really good job in looking at the partnerships, everybody who's using this information, showing the fiscal benefits of having this data and what's moving forward, and then really validating the number of things that can be done with it. So small steps in data make great strides in knowledge, and here's lots of different USGS information that you can go look for at the 3-DEP program that's going to tell you information about what this data does, what the benefits of this data are, and how to kind of push that if people that are making money decisions have questions. All right, so here are our conclusions. We're wrapping it up. I'm getting there right on time. So high resolution data is a great gift, but you got to be prepared for it. You don't have to be a master of LiDAR data to use LiDAR data, but you just have to make sure that you know what you're getting into. Technology is ever advancing, so you want to make sure that you're prepared. You got software technologies and storage to do the processing, and then make friends. The more friends you have, the more data you'll get, the more value you'll have in your data, the more forward you can move. So with that, we want to say a special thanks to all of our interviewees. It was great to talk to everybody across the nation to kind of see how they're using this information, and we are available if you have any questions.
Thank you, Hope. Currently, we do not have any questions in the chat box. I think you covered everything, maybe.
Well, you know where to find me if you
do. That makes sense. So we do have an exit poll that should be showing up on your screen. Please fill that out before you leave, and we do appreciate you stopping by. Have a good conference.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.